What's up, Space Pirates? I am your captain, the chronically charismatic Dr. Disaster, and today we are going to talk about master plans. Specifically, we have to talk about the master plans, or lack thereof, of Kathleen Kennedy.
I got a goddamn plan!
The plans of Darth Kennedy to make Star Wars movies and shows just for the sake of making Star Wars movies and shows has come to fruition, and the whole thing is a big damned mess. They are in the middle of what will be a 7-year drought between films. The TV shows are falling off precipitously in popularity. Kennedy's empire is screwed. For the longest time, journalists in the media tried to protect her and protect the sequel trilogy because they want access to Disney. But that time seems to be ending. The mainstream is done pretending that those films were good. These days, we get interviews like the one we are going to look at in this video, in which Adam Driver tells us something that most of us could sense when we were originally watching the Star Wars sequels, that there was no coherent plan for the sequel trilogy.
Brilliant!
Brilliant.
In place of a plan, we got the Star Wars story equivalent of a Mad Libs, where they just made it all up on the spot. For years, these bozos in the media tried to put lipstick on the sequel trilogy pig, but it failed. And now, guys like Adam Driver can come out and tell us how it really is. In this video, we are going to have a look at what Adam Driver said, and then we are going to peek at the complete breakdown of Star Wars popularity as a brand ever since. The media psyop has failed.
I've got a plan so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
Alright, me hearties, as usual, like this video in order to help me overcome the evil algorithm monster, and make sure to follow me on Twitter/X. My handle on there is Dr. Disaster1. I'd really love to see you on there. In any event, without further ado, here is an article discussing the recent comments of Adam Driver. This article is from Star Wars News Net. It is titled, Adam Driver on signing to play Kylo Ren before Ben Solo's redemption was planned. That was never a part of it. The article reads, in a stunning move, given how the last few years have played out, Adam Driver is talking about Star Wars for the second time within the past month, after talking to CNN's Chris Wallace about the process of signing on to do The Force Awakens. Driver recently stopped by the Rich Eisen show to talk about Kylo Ren's arc throughout the sequel trilogy and how that kept changing with time. Driver, who is currently out promoting Ferrari, said the following when asked if he knew he was playing Vader 2.0. I did, yeah, and I had an overall arc that in mind that J.J. Abrams wanted to do. His idea was that Kylo's journey was the opposite journey of Vader, where Vader starts the most confident and the most committed to the dark side, and then by the last movie, he's the most vulnerable and weak. He wanted to start with the opposite. This character was the most confused and vulnerable, and by the end of the 3 movies, he would be the most committed to the dark side. I tried to keep that arc in mind, regardless if that wound up not being the journey anyway, because it changed while shooting, but I was still focused on that. Now, not to defend J.J. Abrams or anything, or even to agree with him, because the dude is a terrible storyteller who would have no clue how to complete an arc if you handed him a frickin' ring. But I will say this, that idea about Kylo going from confused and vulnerable and eventually becoming darker and more committed to the dark side sounds like a much more coherent and interesting direction for the character than what we got. Once again, I'm not an Abrams fan or anything, but this wasn't the worst idea for the story. I find myself wishing we had gotten to see that play out instead of the abortion that was The Last Jedi. Anyhow, let's continue with the article. Eisen then asked when the character's arc changed, and Driver said the following. With Ryan, he took it in a different direction, but it still tracked with the character, and then the last one, it changed into being, about them and the dyad and things like that, and evolving into Ben Solo. That was never a part of it. He was Ben Solo from the beginning, but there was never a version where we'd see Ben Solo when I first signed up for it. Well, of course not, Adam. There was no version of it because Rian Johnson hadn't yet fired his Death Star on the story yet. Once again, I'm not defending JJ here, but there was precious little that could be done to save Episode 9 after Episode 8. There was no damned point. Compare the ending of the second film in the original trilogy to the ending of the second film in the sequel trilogy. In the OT, Luke had just gotten his ass kicked at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, courtesy of Darth Vader, who had also told him he was his father. To top it off, there was still the menace of the Emperor and his entire empire to deal with. Contrast that to the end of The Last Jedi, where Rey has already beaten Kylo Ren the first time she ever used a lightsaber. The sequel equivalent of the Emperor is already killed, and Kylo Ren is the de facto big bad moving forward, whom Rey has already defeated. No wonder they had to pull out the old zombie Palpatine. Otherwise, there would have been no threat. The article continues. Driver's comments are really not that surprising, though they are worth listening to because of how thoughtful he is about everything he does. Driver was first approached to play the main villain in the sequels around the end of 2013 or the start of 2014. At that time, J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan had been rewriting Michael Arndt's script for Episode 7 for a few months, but the studio had scrapped Arndt's overall treatment for the sequel trilogy. In an effort to meet the 2015 release date Disney had set for the film, they decided to take it one film at a time and let Rian Johnson figure out what to do with Episode 8 on his own.
Are you brain dead?
Seriously, how brain dead do you have to be to think that this was a good idea? To think that this was the best way to approach a sequel to one of the most culturally important film events in history? Obviously, this was always going to be a hyper-scrutinized series of films, so why the hell would they want to do it with no story plan? Well, I can tell you why. It's right here in what was just said. Disney had set a 2015 release date. This is the problem with corporate studios being in charge of this kind of stuff. It becomes joyless and soulless when corporations make all the decisions because they don't care about story or artistic integrity or even coherence within a story. They just want to make money. Back then, they knew that they could have just filmed Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher all like sleeping or taking a dump or something, and it would have made them billions. They didn't have to try because the brand of Star Wars was so powerful. But now they have ruined the brand, and it has the opposite effect on many fans. Kathleen Kennedy's grand plan has done the opposite of pay off for her and Disney, but she's doubling down on the lack of planning again. The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2 were pretty fun and had me at least semi-excited about Star Wars again, but season 3 had a feel very much like the sequel trilogy. It was pointless, meandering, and just felt entirely unplanned. It was as if they were just going through the motion of making the show just for the sake of making something. Well, it's biting them in the ass. The Mandalorian Season 3 got a 51% Rotten Tomatoes audience score compared to 92 for Season 1 and 91 for Season 2. And what's more, look at this Google Trends chart, which lists all the Star Wars shows from the last few years. As you can see, this chart goes back 5 years, and that first blue spike is the first season of The Mandalorian, and the second spike is the second season, but there is a general downward trend in audience interest across the board after that second season. Google Trends, as you may know, is a service offered by Google in which you can type in a search term and they will show you its popularity relative to other search terms. As you can see, people are checking out from Star Wars. The Book of Boba Fett is in red. That was barely a blip on the radar compared to The Mandalorian. There was some extra excitement for Obi-Wan, which is represented by the line in yellow, but that's because people were stoked to see Ewan McGregor back. But Andor in purple is really low. That blue hill on the right is the third season of The Mandalorian. That is much lower than the first 2 seasons. Its crest reaches only 35% in search popularity compared to the first Mandalorian season. And then you can barely see the Ahsoka show represented by the small speck of green on the edge of the chart. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares about Star Wars. The beauty of George Lucas's creation originally is that it was a well-told story that meant something to people. But when the story is so meaningless that not even the creators care about it, well, that story is going to die for everyone but the biggest diehards and for those who simply love kissing corporate ass, i.e. the wokesters who love their corporate overlords and will spread their message of division and intolerance under the guise of moral purity. Star Wars is basically dead because Kathleen Kennedy killed it. Let's savor the next few years as its zombie husk gets its ass kicked by the fans.
Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your captain is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.